Hello and welcome to the editorial analysis of the Hindu. Today we shall be discussing the editorial of the 12th of September. So coming to the first article, the absence of constitutional court. Basically the context of this article is with regards to the functioning of the judiciary, the responsibilities of the judiciary from the prism of the recent issue or the recent controversy of Jammu and Kashmir. Several articles I have discussed on this, yet again another article, but some new points, and that is why I picked it up. So coming to the analysis, first and foremost I have discussed about the ADM Jabalpur case. This was a case that came to the Supreme Court in the year 1976, and it was at that point of time that the Supreme Court had said that habeas corpus as a fundamental right will not exist. So this is one of the cases that is the darkest chapter in the history of Supreme Court, and this judgment, the ADM Jabalpur judgment by the Supreme Court in the year 1976 is also what was known as the habeas corpus judgment. So this is a new name for the judgment, and that is why I included it, because you can have a question as to about the habeas corpus judgment or the ADM Jabalpur case. So in both the cases you should know the name so that you can identify the question and you can accordingly answer it. So that is the first important thing. The second important thing is that recently also the Supreme Court later, as soon as the judgment was given in the year 1976 and later when the emergency was withdrawn, the Supreme Court sort of got to know, it had a realization that it had made one of the biggest, most flawed judgments of its entire existence. This was primarily because the excesses that the government did as per the judgment that the Supreme Court had given was something that was stark, and they were later, it was later that it was discovered. So what happened then is that the court denied that this judgment is what is not valid, and even the court has said that this is what should be buried so deep that it cannot be resurrected. So now what the courts have come up with is the idea of the principle of proportionality. Very, very important. Use this word as a key word itself. You might have a question where you will have to analyze whether the stand or the function of the judiciary has been acceptable or not, and that is where you have to talk about the positives also. You cannot go all about the criticisms only. So this is one thing, that there is a provision for this kind of a functioning by the government which has been laid down by the Supreme Court itself, and this is what is the principle of proportionality. According to the principle of proportionality, if the rights of a person are to be infringed in the interest of a larger goal by the government, then the measures that the government is adopting to ensure that these rights are restricted or the larger goal is met are what have to be rationally related. It cannot take place that the government is saying that the rational goal is of national security, and in the name of national security it is just doing anything that it desires. That cannot happen. Any action that the government is taking, it will have to justify that I am taking this particular action because this is how national security will be maintained. So that is one issue, or the idea of principle of proportionality. Now, despite the fact that the Supreme Court has given these guidelines, these are what are not being followed in the Jammu and Kashmir issue, is what is being argued in the editorial. Why they are not being followed in Jammu and Kashmir issue is because the detention of the leaders is what cannot explain that yes, the detention of the leaders is important for keeping the national security in interest, and that is one thing that is being questioned here. So this is important. Another thing that for long I wanted to mention, but it is just somehow skipping my discussion, is about Justice H.R. Khanna. We have recently also discussed that how there is a crackdown on constitutional posts, how constitutionally protected posts are also not secure in the current times. Now that is where this example of Justice H.R. Khanna becomes very, very important. You will have to remember the name. Justice H.R. Khanna was the only judge who had at that point of time not agreed with the habeas corpus judgment. He had defied this judgment and he had given a contrary view, which clearly shows that the honorable judge here had the stand and had the models to stand against the government and stand against the majority at that point of time, and this isn't what is required as of now of all of our leaders. So that is important. Another thing that is important that has been discussed is in the context of Jammu and Kashmir. We all know that since August 5 there is a communication lockdown. This violates the fundamental rights of freedom of expression, freedom of speech of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. That time also I had told you one simple thing, that there might be a student in Jammu and Kashmir who is preparing for UPSC, and that student as of now does not have access to internet. How will that student write his or her mains without this preparation? Even this video is reaching the students because you have an internet connection. There are so many luxuries that we have which we are taking for granted, and these students students there might be suffering. So these are just showing that what is the apathy of the government at this point of time, and that is what is important. Also, the United Nations Human Rights Commission has talked about this. It has criticized India for these kinds of crackdowns. It has even called this a sort of a collective punishment. Why is it that all the people are being punished? Even if some people there are having separatist tendencies, they are associating with the terrorists. Is it that the entire population is criminal? That cannot be proven. And that is what is the stand of the United Nations Human Rights Commission. And this coming from the Human Rights Commission is entirely not in good taste. This is something that is not something that should be welcomed by India, and India should ensure that some changes are what are brought about, and this kind of criticism from the highest body is not in the interest of India, so that is important. Also, what has been discussed here is with regards to the silence of courts. Now basically, during 1976, the judgment, or primarily this habeas corpus judgment, was what was outrightly manifestation of the support that judiciary gave to then government's actions, to the supremacy of the executive at that point of time. Clearly, this kind of an open support is what has not come from the courts as of now, but still the courts are supporting indirectly is what is being argued here. This indirect support is coming from their silence. They are either dodging this issue, the courts are either ducking this issue, they are evading the issue, they are adjourning the matter, and this is what is being analyzed here. One thing you have to understand is that this erodes the trust of the people in judiciary. If people of Jammu and Kashmir will not get what they deserve from the judiciary, their fundamental rights will not be protected by the guardian of the fundamental rights, do you think they will trust the judiciary? They will not. And this is what will undermine the credibility of this institution as such. India's entire constitution, our entire structure of functioning of this nation is based on the idea of checks and balances, where different institutions are acting as checks and balances on the excesses by any institution. If this balance is what is distorted, the country will not be able to stand for long, and that is what is important. Another important line or metaphor that I have found here is that people can be silenced. For instance, in Jammu and Kashmir, what is taking place? People are being silenced, that can be done. But can laws also be silenced? Laws can never be silenced, because laws have the validation of the people. Laws have the backing of the constitution. How is it that even the fundamental rights are being silenced for Jammu and Kashmir is the question that is being raised here. Time and again, criticism for the government's action on Jammu and Kashmir we are seeing in the editorials. I am expecting this kind of a question at least in your interview or in the personality test. So you must be prepared with this kind of an analysis. So that's about this particular article. Coming to the next article, a case for a differential global carbon tax. This is context with regards to climate change and what should be done in this regard. The first important analysis is that this is what is a global problem, and if this is what is a global problem, the solution also has to be global. Now recently there is a lot of debate that is going on between globalization and nationalism, and time and again it is being argued that globalization is what is dead, long gone is globalization, the era of globalization. The countries are now working in national interest, but that is where this issue will come as a counter example. All issues of the world cannot be solved at the national level. One has to go global on several issues, and climate change is one of those issues, very, very important. Another thing that is important is with regards to the impacts that climate change is happening. Now basically, as per the IPCC report, which we have discussed, that the 5th report by the IPCC is what has come. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is saying that the impacts are what will be seen just in one more decade. So by the year 2030 to 2050, huge amounts of impact of global warming will be seen. But the sad part is that the impact will be seen in the tropical region and primarily in the global south. But whereas the major contribution is what has taken place by the global north. So what is happening is that the errors of global north is what will be paid first by the global south, which is important, and this is one of the basic issues. This is that is impacting the entire conversation on climate change. This has also been reflected in the idea of the climate injustice funnel. Very, very, very important this diagram is. Climate injustice funnel, name it as such, draw it as such. Many times students ask me that they don't understand how to come up with innovative diagrams. These are the innovative diagrams. This is drawn in the form of a funnel, and it marks the relationship between the level of income as well as the emissions that are taking place at a global level. If you will see, the high income countries have an emission of 10.5%, whereas the upper middle income countries have global emissions of 6.5%, whereas middle income countries have 3.9%, then lower middle income countries have emissions of 1.5%. these are actually in million tons of carbon dioxide per capita. So this is the figure, also the unit that is important, and the low income countries have only 0.3. So can you see this funnel, that large part of the high income countries are contributing very, very highly for the carbon dioxide emission, and that is what is important. Draw this diagram. I cannot repeat the importance of this diagram. It is very, very important. Make a note of this diagram. Just right now make it note of it and keep it with you so that you can produce it in your answers. Definitely you will be rewarded. Coming to the third issue that is important, the idea here that the editorial is offering is that of a just energy transition. What it is saying is that what is first and foremost important is that an energy transition takes place. That means that we have to shift our energy generation from methods where carbon dioxide is emitted to methods which are more green in nature, which are less carbon dioxide emitting. We'll have to go for cleaner fuels. That is important. But what is being ensured, what should be ensured here is that this energy transition takes place in a just manner. How can this take place in a just manner? It can take place in a just manner in a way that the major countries, the more powerful countries, the richer countries will definitely ensure that energy transition take place for themselves. But these richer countries should also ensure and contribute for energy transition in the other countries which are comparatively poorer countries, and they have not yet emitted emissions to the matching of these northern countries. So that is what has been talked. So what will happen is that the countries, the global south countries will also ensure that energy transition takes place. That will be their contribution. But the contribution from the bigger countries for the injustice that they have caused is that they will contribute for this. So this is one model that is advocated. How will financing for this come? Financing model is what has been proposed. Now basically here the editorial is advocating for a global carbon tax, which is also the name of the article, that a tax is what should be set up, that is the global carbon tax. Now what has been argued here is that the emissions as of now in the world are 36.1 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions are what are generated, and as for the math, the tax of $46.1 metric ton is what should be initiated. This is the tax ratio that has been analyzed here. This is primarily not important, but what is important is that if this is what is going to happen, this kind of a model of just energy transition has to develop through financing, then in that case the biggest payer will be countries like US and China, and the biggest receiver will be countries like India. Also receiving countries will be developed countries like France, Sweden and Switzerland. So the idea here is that it is not that how developed a country is, but how much a country is emitting per capita, and on that basis these countries should be compensated. So that is what has been suggested. Another thing that has been talked about is a Robin Hood tax. This is what is the global green Robin Hood tax, which advocates that just like Robin Hood, money should be taken from the corrupt richer people and should be given to the poorer people. So that is what has been talked about. Now basically this article is important from some point of view. Definitely this could be one of the suggestions. The article is highly deviated towards only one single opinion, and I don't value these kind of articles very much. UPSC will always reward you for an overall analysis. UPSC will never welcome only one single suggestion. You have to view a particular matter from several dimensions, and then you have to come up with your analysis, and you have to come up with your suggestions also. So for climate change there are a number of other areas which need to be explored. Yes, a just energy transition and global carbon tax could be one of them, but not an all-encompassing. So that's about this particular article. But yes, the article offers us a very, very important diagram. Make a note of this. So that's about this particular article, and that's about our discussion today. These are the only two articles which I have personally found important. So that's about our discussion. I thank you all for watching the video.